The wind rolled down from the mountains in long, tired breaths. It carried the scent of pine, dry leaves, and the first warnings of snow. Clara Bennett stood on the wraparound porch of her mother's old house, hands in her coat pockets, eyes scanning the line of evergreens at the edge of the property. This wasn't where she thought she'd be at 34. Not after a decade in San Francisco, climbing the tech ladder, surviving long nights and VC deadlines. But her mother's voice had brought her home, in the end. Not with a call, but a will. Cancer didn't wait. It didn't argue. It just took. Clara hadn't made it back in time to say goodbye. Now she stood alone on 5 acres of pine-backed land and grief-thick air, surrounded by memories that weren't fully hers. Her mother had kept the place quiet, distant, rustic, no Wi-Fi, a rotary phone, journals instead of emails, and a locked storage shed Clara hadn't remembered until today. She made her way across the frost-bitten grass, boots crunching on twigs. The shed leaned slightly west, hidden behind a tool-lined garage and overgrown blackberry bushes. The padlock was old but solid. Clara fetched bolt cutters from the workbench inside and clipped it with 2 strong squeezers. The doors creaked open. Inside, it was darker than it should have been, and colder, like something had exhaled. The smell hit her first, earthy, animal, wrong, then the sound, a faint whimper. Clara blinked and stepped into the shed, pulling the chain cord for the single overhead bulb. That's when she saw it, a wooden crate the size of a freezer, pushed against the back wall. It had iron bolts on 3 sides, and faint markings burned into the wood. Military style, functional, not decorative. Something moved inside. Clara hesitated, then crouched. She saw eyes, 5 pairs, glinting in the dim light. They didn't bark, they didn't growl, they just watched her. German shepherds, 5 of them, thin, but alive, muscles taut under coarse fur. Dust and straw clung to their coats. She stood frozen, hands trembling. Who would put them here? And why? She reached for the latch. They didn't move, except one. He stepped forward, slow and steady, placing himself between Clara and the others. His eyes locked with hers. Unblinking, deliberate. She froze. Then he did something strange. He sat, tilted his head, then lifted his paw and tapped it against the wood. 3 times. Clara stared. He tapped again, once, then waited. She crouched slowly, heart pounding. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, boy, I see you." The dog didn't wag his tail. He didn't whine. He just watched her with a calm intensity that felt more human than animal. Tattooed in the fold of his ear were numbers A701492. She found similar markings on the others. A rough scan of their coats revealed clipped fur behind the ears, implant scars. Collars long gone. Only this one, the one who tapped, seemed alert enough to understand her presence. She read the name engraved faintly on his collar tag. Half buried in grime. Orion. Clara brought them inside, one by one, gently coaxed with water and low, calm words. Orion helped. He led the others with silent authority. guiding him forward, pushing them past their fear. He walked beside her like he had known her for years. Once they were inside, Clara fashioned a makeshift shelter in the garage, laid out towels, bowls of water, and what little dog food had been left in the pantry. She would have to drive into town for more. She kept the garage door cracked, a heat lamp over their corner. By nightfall, they had all eaten, except Orion. He sat by the door, watching, waiting. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, trying to research the numbers tattooed in the dog's ears. Nothing came up, no matching format, not military, not veterinary, not any public database. At least, none she could access. But she knew code when she saw it. These weren't just strays. And they weren't pets. They had been trained and hidden. The bigger question wasn't who did this. It was why were they hidden here? And why had her mother never told her? At 3:14 a.m., the porch light flicked on. Motion sensor. Clara sat up straight. She peered out the window. Someone was standing near the fence line. Still, shadowed, watching. She flipped on the floodlights. The figure turned and walked away, slow, not startled, disappearing into the trees without a word. She stepped onto the porch barefoot, heart pounding. Orion stood in the garage doorway, growling low, not barking, just vibrating with alertness. When she looked at him, he looked back at her. And she realized something in his eyes that chilled her. He knew. He had expected him to come. And now, so did Clara. The next morning, Clara called the local sheriff. He came out, listened politely, took notes, said he'd check the trail cameras, and add a few more patrols. But his face said the same thing his tone did. Mountain folk see things. Doesn't mean it's real. She didn't argue. Instead, she went to the hardware store, bought new locks, new cameras, a shotgun. That night, she slept with Orion curled outside her bedroom door. He never closed his eyes. Not once. In the days that followed, the other dogs grew stronger. One had a limp, another a tooth infection, but they adapted fast. They never fought. They responded to gestures, single-syllable commands Clara never taught them. When she said, "Stay," they held still. When she said, "Come," they moved in formation. But none of them responded to anyone but Orion. And Orion, he only listened to Clara. She noticed it on the 5th day. A van, parked half a mile down the road near the old trail entrance. Just far enough to be lost or broken down. Same van, 3 times. The same man smoking by the driver door. Dark coat, no license plate. She saw binoculars on the dash. And something colder in the man's eyes when he looked her way. Orion stepped beside her as she stared through her kitchen window. He growled, deep and low, not fear, recognition. Something in her gut dropped. "Orion," she whispered, "what did they do to you?" He didn't answer. Of course. But he didn't stop watching that van, either. Clara didn't sleep much anymore. Her days were filled with feeding, cleaning, watching over the 5 German shepherds who moved through her life like shadows. Loyal but silent, her nights were spent chasing ghosts, combing through her mother's old notebooks, computer files, and closets that hadn't been opened in years. She no longer questioned whether something bigger was happening. She knew, and she was getting closer to the truth. The break came late one night. In the attic. She'd been searching for old vet records, anything that might explain why her mother had kept 5 emaciated, highly trained dogs in a locked storage shed like living secrets. The attic was cold and smelled of cedar and dust, stacked with boxes labeled in her mother's neat handwriting. One box sat alone in the corner. No label. Inside, a pile of worn journals, several cassette tapes in a faded envelope, and a small, gray plastic flash drive taped to the underside of the lid. Clara carried it all downstairs. She started with the journals, her mother's handwriting filling each page in tight, slanted loops. Most of it was mundane, day-to-day chores, medical records. But then, around the middle of the second journal, a name kept recurring: Nathan Holloway. Clara had never heard it before. Her mother had written, "Nathan brought them, said it was too late, said Helix was finished. I didn't ask why, not right away. They were barely standing, one had been shot, one was blind in his left eye. But they looked at me like they still trusted someone. That was enough." Clara kept reading, page after page of hidden history, pieces falling into place. Her mother had once worked as a contract medical advisor for a defense contractor. The Helix K9 program wasn't veterinary, it was behavioral, designed to enhance tactical canine intelligence, communication, and combat awareness, funded by a black-budget military wing. And something had gone very wrong. Clara clicked play on the first cassette. Static. Then a deep male voice, raspy, tired, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. "If you're listening to this, Naomi, it means you kept them alive. Or tried to. I couldn't get out with all of them. God, I hope you got Orion. He was always the leader. Always different. The others, if they followed him, maybe they made it too. They'll never stop looking. Naomi." Helix was shut down, but Mercer warned me they wouldn't let the dogs just walk. They were trained to kill, to retrieve, to obey under the worst conditions. But they started asking questions. Not the handlers. The dogs. Especially Orion. Clara paused the tape. Heart racing. She played the next one. After the Helix incident, they buried it, sealed the records, said it was a system failure. But those dogs, those souls, they weren't hardware. They were something more, and you saw that too. You were the only one who treated them like lives, not loadouts. Clara sat back, breathless. Everything made sense now. The tattoos in their ears, the behaviors, the silent communication between them, and why her mother had kept them hidden. They were never meant to be saved. They were meant to disappear. The flash drive was encrypted. But Clara bypassed the protection in under an hour. Years of writing code for billion-dollar software companies made that part easy. Inside were files, mission logs, operative reports, brain mapping trial data, a folder labeled failure_07. She opened it. There was only a single document. It read, Op. Ridgeback, Site 6, 0700 hours, handler deceased. K9s unresponsive to kill code. Alpha Unit, Orion, initiated fallback maneuver. Retrieved wounded units. Disregarded termination command. Status: Rogue. Clara stared at the screen. They had been ordered to die. And Orion had refused. He'd disobeyed. He'd protected the others. He'd escaped. And her mother had helped him do it. A knock at the door nearly stopped Clara's heart. She reached for the pistol she now kept in the drawer by the kitchen counter. Moved slowly to the window. It was a man, older, dressed in dark jeans, a brown canvas jacket, ball cap pulled low. He didn't look like the others, the watchers near the van. But he also didn't look like someone who needed directions. He stood patiently, not moving, his hands in view. Orion growled softly behind her. But not the same growl. This was recognition. Clara opened the door. Half. The man removed his cap. Gray hair, sharp eyes, a calm face with years behind it. "Clara Bennett?" he asked. "Who's asking?" "Name's James Mercer. I knew your mother." Clara's breath caught. She stepped back. "Mercer?" He nodded. "Mind if I come in?" She hesitated, then opened the door. Orion didn't bark. He stepped forward, sniffed the man, then sat beside Clara like a silent guard. Mercer knelt slightly. "Good to see you again, Orion," he murmured. The dog blinked slowly. "He remembers you," Clara said. "I'd be surprised if he didn't." She folded her arms. "What do you want?" "To warn you." Mercer took a seat at the table. Scanned the room like a trained observer. "You found the tapes?" She nodded. "I figured Naomi would leave you something. She trusted you more than she trusted most of us. But now that the dogs are back in motion, you need to know, others will be coming too. Not like me." "Who?" "The original handlers are scattered. Some turned whistleblowers, some disappeared. But the ones in charge now, the ones pulling strings behind shell companies and private security firms, they still want Helix wiped from existence. They're just dogs." Mercer looked at her hard. "No, they're evidence. Walking proof that the program worked until it went rogue." He paused. "They don't care that they were abused, or experimented on, or left to die. To them, Orion and the others are broken tools. And broken tools get decommissioned." Clara's fists clenched. "They're not tools," she said, "they're lives." Mercer nodded slowly. "That's why I came. Because I think you believe that. And because they," he looked down at Orion, "chose you." Before Mercer left, he handed her a phone number. "Burner line. Only for emergencies." Clara asked, "Why help me?" He answered, "Because Naomi saved my life once. And because Orion saved it again." Then he added, quieter, "You don't have much time. If they know the dogs are here, they'll make their move soon. Be ready." That night, Clara sat in the garage with all 5 dogs around her. She gently scratched behind Orion's ears. "I know who you are now," she said softly. "You're not a ghost. You're not a weapon. You're someone." Orion leaned into her hand. "You protected them. You saved them. Now I have to do the same." The dog lifted his head slightly. and tapped his paw against her boot. Once, then twice, then 3 times. A signal, a vow. Clara understood. They were no longer just survivors. They were together now. And someone was coming. The knock came at 10:17 a.m. Too precise to be casual. Clara was in the kitchen, feeding the dogs. Orion, as always, was last to eat. His habit of scanning the doors before lowering his head had never changed. Today was no different, except this time, when the knock came, he didn't look at the door. He looked at Clara, and growled. She opened it cautiously. 2 men in tailored black coats stood outside. They wore pressed suits too clean for mountain dust, with boots too polished for hiking. One had slicked back gray hair and mirrored sunglasses. The other held a thin, leather portfolio under one arm. The older one smiled. "Ms. Bennett, I presume." She didn't return it. "Who's asking?" "I'm Richard Sloane. This is my associate, Mr. Hale. We represent Trillon Systems. We understand you recently inherited this property." Clara stiffened. "That's right. We're interested in purchasing it." Her laugh was short. "It's not for sale." Sloane didn't blink. "I believe everything has a price." Clara's voice cooled. "And I believe you already know what's on this property. You're not here for the house." He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "We're prepared to offer a very generous sum. As is. No inspections. No contingencies. Fast closing." Clara stepped forward, closing the door slightly between them. "If I say no," Mr. Hale answered flatly, "you'll regret it." Clara didn't hesitate. "I already do." Then she shut the door firmly. That night, she didn't sleep. She set up cameras around the perimeter and put motion sensors in the shed, the barn, and the porch. She cleaned her shotgun, charged the backup generator, backed up all her mother's files onto 2 encrypted drives and mailed one to Merce's safehouse in Montana. By midnight, the dogs were uneasy. Orion stayed by the back door. His ears never stopped twitching. At 2:41 a.m., the garage camera blinked. Movement. A shadow by the window. Then the side door creaked. Someone had picked the lock. Clara grabbed the shotgun and flicked on the external floodlights. By the time she reached the garage, the dogs were already up. All of them, eyes glowing, teeth bared. But Orion was already moving. He launched toward the intruder in total silence, leaping before the man could draw his weapon. They crashed into the workbench. The gun clattered to the floor. The man screamed once. And then, silence again. By the time Clara arrived, Orion stood over the intruder, a man in tactical gear, unconscious and bleeding from his temple. On the floor beside him, a syringe, half filled. Clara's blood ran cold. She knelt, picked it up, marked on the side, MKV-9, a veterinary-grade paralytic. "Jesus," she muttered. Orion stood beside her, breathing hard, fur raised. Not shaking, not scared, prepared. She called Mercer. He arrived by dawn. By then, the intruder had vanished, dragged away during the night. Despite the trail of blood leading toward the forest, Clara hadn't pursued. Not alone. She knew better. But Mercer came with 2 trucks, 3 men, and a quiet determination Clara hadn't seen since their first meeting. "This isn't going to stop," he told her as they unloaded supplies. "These people don't issue warnings. They erase loose ends." Clara looked at the dogs lying under the porch. Quiet but alert. "I'm not a loose end," she said. Mercer nodded. "No, but they think the dogs are." By noon, a small defense network had formed. A retired ranger named Lupe Alvarez, who once helped Naomi track injured elk in the valley, showed up with trail cameras and scoped binoculars. A mechanic named Daniel Birch brought a power inverter, a pallet of MREs, and a grudge against government men in suits. A local vet, Dr. Cora Wynn, offered mobile first aid and sedatives, just in case. All of them had known Naomi Bennett. All of them remembered what she had done for the community. "She stitched up my dog after a cougar took half his ear," Lupe said, handing Clara a walkie-talkie. "Didn't take a dime. She got my brother off painkillers." Daniel muttered, "Did it with herbs and tough love." "She knew," Cora whispered, "about people, and dogs, and what they meant." Clara swallowed hard. Her mother had never talked about being part of a military program. But maybe she hadn't needed to. Her actions had always told the truth. That night, they set up shifts. Lupe on the North Line, Daniel covering the trail access, Mercer walking the property perimeter with Orion at his side. Clara stayed in the house, watching camera feeds, her hand never far from the shotgun. The others rested, dozed, drank coffee, whispered about what might come next. Orion never slept. He stood beneath the porch light, tail still, ears twitching at every gust of wind. Like he'd waited years for this moment. Like protecting this place, this person, was what he'd been made for. Clara sat with Mercer at the back porch around 1 a.m. "Why now?" she asked. "Why are they suddenly moving?" Mercer sipped black coffee from a thermos. "Because you're a variable. You're not in their equation. You have files. You have the dogs. You're not in uniform. You're unpredictable." Clara shook her head. "So they come at night. With syringes. They want them alive," he said. "Orion especially. They never solved Helix's code problem. They think maybe they can still learn from him." Clara looked into the dark woods, her voice tight. "He's not a formula. He's a being. They all are." Mercer nodded. "You're preaching to the choir, kid." She looked at him. "How far will they go?" He didn't hesitate. "Far enough to burn this place down." Clara clenched her jaw. "Then we don't let them." Mercer gave her a long look, then raised his thermos. "To the ones who fight back." Clara tapped her mug against his. "To the ones who were never just dogs." At sunrise, the fields were quiet. The birds returned to the branches. The frost melted on the windows. And inside the barn, 5 German shepherds lay curled in silence, scarred. Sleeping. Safe. For now. Orion opened one eye, watched the door, listened, and waited. Not for escape. Not for command. But for the next time he'd have to choose. And there would be a next time. Because the world that made him wasn't done trying to take him back. But now, He wasn't alone. He had Clara. He had a name. And for the first time in his life, he had people. People who saw him not as property, but as family. The first article ran on a quiet Tuesday morning. Buried in the back pages of a local paper. Under the community section, the headline read, "Daughter of late veterinarian alleges military cover-up behind canine program." Most skimmed it. Some dismissed it. But a few people, particularly those who had worked in biotech, or remembered Project Helix as a half-rumored ghost from military whispers, read every word. Clara hadn't waited for permission. She had scanned everything. Her mother's journals. The tapes from Nathan Holloway. The encrypted documents. Even footage of Orion's precision behavior and the attempted break-in. She packaged it all and gave it to a local reporter named Marcy Klein. Then she did what few would dare. She signed her name. Clara Bennett. Daughter of Naomi Bennett. Software engineer. Civilian. Witness to the truth. And guardian of 5 very extraordinary dogs. The article triggered a slow burn. Within a week, Marcy's inbox was flooded. A Colorado-based human rights firm, Stonebridge Legal, reached out. They had long chased the edges of illegal experimentation in defense tech and saw Clara's evidence as something explosive. A lawsuit was drafted. Public filings cited violations of federal animal welfare law, unauthorized neurological enhancement trials, and conspiracy to conceal government-sponsored bioengineering programs. The accused, Trillian Systems, listed as a shell corporation under a larger defense conglomerate. The case made the evening news by week 3. Then came the retaliation. Trillian hit back hard and fast. Within days, multiple media outlets published hit pieces on Clara. One article claimed she had stolen government property. Another called her mentally unstable, citing her time in tech startups and referencing, with wild exaggeration, a misdiagnosed panic attack from years prior. A national tabloid aired distorted footage of Orion training in the field, painting him as a genetically altered attack dog capable of extreme aggression. They labeled her a fraud, a fame seeker, a paranoid daughter living in her dead mother's delusions. The public was torn. Online debates exploded. Memes spread. Some mocked. Some questioned. But others started to dig. And some started to believe. Clara tried to ignore the noise. She stayed focused, kept her head down, but it wore on her. Each time she opened her laptop. More vitriol, more speculation. Were the dogs real? Were they dangerous? What made her the expert? And still, she pushed forward. Mercer and the locals supported her. Stonebridge built a case file that grew thicker each week. Congressional aides sent quiet emails asking for redacted versions of her evidence. But the air was heavy with tension. Until the day it all changed. It was a Saturday. Overcast. Cold. Clara had taken Orion and one of the younger dogs, Echo, on a short hike near the South Ridge. The air smelled like damp pine and stone. They liked this route. Quiet. Off-trail. Away from everything. They were passing near a rock shelf when she heard it. A scream. Not loud, not far, but sharp, frightened. A child. She ran toward the sound, calling out. No answer. Then Echo barked twice and sprinted through the trees. Clara and Orion followed. They found her within 2 minutes. A small girl, maybe 7, clinging to a twisted root inside a deep sinkhole. The ground around the edges was fractured. The drop at least 15 feet down. She was crying, her ankle clearly injured, her hand barely gripping the ledge. Orion stepped forward, ears alert. Clara knelt. "It's okay, I see you. Don't let go." The girl whimpered. "Help me, please, my foot." Clara looked at Orion. "I can't reach her, but maybe you can." Orion looked at the edge, assessed, then moved. He didn't hesitate. He lowered himself slowly over the ledge, using the tree root for balance, and descended with careful placement. When he reached her, he sat beside her, pressed close. She clung to his neck instinctively, burying her face into his fur, breathing in his presence like it was air. Clara called for help. Park rangers were alerted. Rescue teams were dispatched. But for 30 minutes, Orion stayed in the hole. He didn't bark, didn't panic. He simply stayed. When the team arrived and lowered a stretcher, Orion waited for them to take the girl, then climbed out behind them with the poise of a veteran firefighter. The moment was captured on a ranger's helmet cam, and went viral within hours. The Internet did what it does best. It watched. Then it judged. And then it remembered. Within 24 hours, the story had spread to national headlines. Dog from military cover-up, case saves child in Colorado. Clips of Orion lying calmly beside the injured girl were shown alongside split screens of Trillin's hit pieces. People saw the difference, the contradiction. One anchor said it best: "If this is what a dangerous asset looks like, maybe it's not the dog that needs investigation, but the people trying to silence the story." Petitions were launched. #Justice for Orion trended for 3 days straight. By the end of the week, over 200,000 signatures demanded a federal probe into Trillian systems. The tide had turned. Clara sat beside Orion that night, running her fingers through the thick fur at his neck. "You saved her," she whispered. Orion didn't move, just leaned slightly into her hand. "You showed them who you are. You showed him everything." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "They can't lie about you anymore." The following Monday, a federal oversight committee announced a formal inquiry into Helix K9. Trillian's media campaign was pulled. 3 former employees turned whistleblowers, citing suppressed data, medical abuse, and falsified logs. Stonebridge requested a temporary protection order over all surviving Helix units, including Orion and the 4 other dogs. The judge granted it. The dogs could not be seized. Not now. Not without a court ruling. And by then, the world would be watching. Clara received a letter that evening from the little girl's family. Inside was a drawing, a stick-figure child holding the paw of a lion-like dog. Under a big pine tree. On the bottom, in red crayon, "To the dog who stayed with me. Thank you." Clara pinned it above her desk, right next to her mother's last journal entry. She whispered, "You were right, Mom." then looked outside. Orion lay under the porch light, eyes open, head resting on his paws, watching, as always, still guarding, still choosing. The hills were green again. Spring had returned to the Rockies in full, sunlight falling in long gold streaks through pine branches. The air sweet with new grass and wild lupine. Where there had once been silence, now there were voices, laughter, barks, and the rhythmic cadence of new life in motion, set against a backdrop of open meadows and rebuilt cabins. A wooden sign hung over a gravel path. Hand-carved, plain, and proud, it read, "The Orion Refuge." Beneath it, a second plaque, "Where loyalty is a choice, and home is earned." The land had once been part of an abandoned trail ranger station. Clara bought it using donations, grant funds, and part of a settlement quietly negotiated with Trillian Systems after federal pressure mounted. The courts never prosecuted fully. The military complex almost never lets its shadows reach daylight. But Clara had achieved something more powerful than punishment. She had earned freedom. For herself. For the dogs. For the legacy her mother died to protect. The Orion Refuge was more than just a sanctuary. It was a program. A new model. Part rehabilitation center. Part training academy, where former working dogs, rescues, and misunderstood cases could recover and find new purpose. They were trained in search and rescue, medical alert response, senior care support, and trauma therapy. Each dog was paired with a human, and each human learned not just how to command, but how to listen. Orion was no longer just a survivor. He was a mentor, the lead dog, as Mercer liked to call him. Smirking over his coffee, Clara called him something else. Founding partner. Mercer lived on the property now. In the renovated ranger's cabin on the edge of the woods. He refused to be called staff, but had quietly become the refuge's security consultant, logistics coordinator, and the unofficial grump all the dogs secretly adored. He kept his ear to the ground, his boots by the door, and his rifle oiled, just in case. "They may not come back," he told Clara once, "but we'll be ready if they do." Clara trusted him. She always had. He had become family in the kind of way that scars people together, not through blood, but through standing side by side in the worst moments, and still showing up afterward. Each dog from the original Helix group found their calling. Echo became a therapy companion for veterans with PTSD. She could sense nightmares before they started and had a way of nudging soldiers back to calm. Rook specialized in wilderness search and rescue. He once led a volunteer team to a missing hiker in the highlands and refused to leave the woman's side until a helicopter arrived. Nova worked with children with autism. Gentle, patient, and expressive. She responded to nonverbal cues with eerie intuition. And Orion. He never left Clara's side. He helped train the newcomers. Walked the trails with kids. Lay beside grieving seniors in hospice programs. But he always returned to her. As if tethered not by command, but choice. The one thing that could never be programmed. Loyalty. It was late afternoon when Clara stood on the porch of the main lodge. her arms crossed gently across her chest. Watching the meadow below, a dozen dogs ran freely in the grass, young ones, new rescues, and the first litter born on sight. Pups with strong legs, bright eyes, and a shared fire in their blood. The litter was special, born to Nova and Orion. A new generation, free from cages, free from war. One of them, a coal-black pup with a white stripe on his chest, barreled toward Clara. Tumbled into her boots, then looked up with wide, alert eyes. She smiled, knelt, and scratched behind his ears. "You've got your father's stare," she whispered. He wagged his tail. Behind her, Orion appeared, older now, silver threading through his fur, a slight limp on bad days. He padded forward slowly, paused at the top of the hill, and watched the pups. Not possessive, just proud. Clara stood beside him. They looked out over the field, where people laughed, where dogs worked, where no one raised their voice in fear, where no one wore collars out of control. Only purpose. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky bled orange across the mountain line, Clara walked the ridge trail with Orion beside her. They didn't speak. They never needed to. When they reached the crest overlooking the valley, Clara stopped. The wind moved gently around them. She pulled something from her coat, a small copper locket. Inside, a photo of her mother, smiling, holding a newborn pup from years ago. Clara whispered, "We did it, Mom." Her voice cracked slightly. "We kept the promise." She turned to Orion. He sat, watching her, head high, but eyes soft. Clara crouched beside him, touched his paw, older now, scarred, but steady. She looked at the horizon again. "You said yes when the world told you to obey. You chose us. Now it's our turn to carry that forward." Orion blinked slowly. A breeze rustled through the pines. Somewhere in the fields below, a young dog barked playfully. Others answered. Clara smiled, tears in her eyes. Softly, she said, "Mom, we kept our word." And in that golden silence, beneath the vast, open sky, filled with laughter, light, and new beginnings, the story of the king and the codebreaker came to rest. Not as tragedy, not as a secret, but as a legacy, living, breathing, running free.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.